Welcome to Leaders Get Real. Inspirational interviews with today's authentic leaders. I'm your host, Christy Tong, bringing you insightful interviews with best-selling authors and with leaders who are purposeful, passionate, and authentic. Gain compelling insights as they share the challenges and rewards of leading with authenticity and impact. Welcome to today's interview with Lisa Lahey, Harvard faculty member and author of the insightful book, Immunity to Change. Have you ever had a personal improvement goal that proved resistant to your smartest plans or your best efforts? We've all been there. Listen in as Lisa reveals groundbreaking research about the deceptively strong hidden commitments working against us and what we can do to close the gap between our good intentions and our actual behaviors. Lisa, I've been so eager for this conversation. I found your book absolutely fascinating and incredibly powerful. Welcome to Leaders Get Real.
Oh, thanks. It's great to be here, and thank you for asking me.
Yes. Well, Lisa, I've been totally compelled by your book and your work on change and how we make change in ourselves. And I've been sharing it with the executives I coach. And we all know the adage that change is hard, or that people can't really change, or they're resistant to change. But you have cracked the code to uncover why change is hard. And one of the things that captivated me right at the start of your book was the research study where doctors told their seriously at-risk patients that they will literally die if they don't make changes. Tell us about that study.
Yes. So let's just quickly go to the bottom line there, which is the study showed that even when people are highly motivated, as in their very lives are on the line, right? Mm-hmm. And they know exactly what to do. It turns out that only 1 out of every 7 patients is able to make the change, at which you have to really take pause at to ground. Yes, change is very hard. And our common, I think, understanding of change is if you have enough motivation and willpower and you know what you need to do, you're going to make it. But what this study shows us is that is insufficient. Mm-hmm. It may be part of the equation, but it does not tell the whole story, because otherwise everyone in that study would have been able to change their behaviors.
Yeah. That was very compelling to think about that. It really brings it home how difficult, even when we really want to make change happen, and we still fail to do that. Well, your book that we're going to focus on today, among others, is Immunity to Change. And tell us about the central message of the book.
Yeah, so I want to start by saying that the title, in some respects, can feel very disheartening. Immunity to change, doesn't that mean I can't change? And to be very clear, the whole point of the book is to say we do have immunities to change. And if we don't acknowledge that we have immunities to change, we will not be able to change. However, if we can see our immunities to change, that is a game changer. And we are thereby able to overcome that immunity to change. So I want to start there, because the title of the book, which of course we didn't come to ourselves, but is the nature of what a publisher does. Yep. You're asking what the central message is. And the bottom line is that adults can change. And this is in contrast to the study that we were just referring to of the heart patients, where, yes, you need to have motivation. You need to have a clear goal. But what I'm suggesting, and our research shows us, is that you also need to see your unconscious self-protective goals that are going to keep you from changing. That's another really essential component. And then once you have that, you will be able to change if you have a change methodology that can meet you at that unconscious level and help you systematically get released from the self-protection system.
Now, I'm especially fascinated in the coaching work that I do. Often I go and do interviews with people right at the start before working with a leader. And sometimes, people will be pretty skeptical about whether this coaching is going to result in anything. Where they're like, yeah. And I think you refer to this in your book as well, where you say people often think somebody, Al is Al. And the best you can do is just leverage the strengths. He's a smart guy. Let's leverage that, and let's hire around some of those weaknesses. So they see someone who's micromanaging, or they see somebody who's really dominant or dismissive, and they don't expect they can make any change. So tell us more about your discoveries that people can change.
Yes. Well, let's use an example that comes just from what you're talking about, which is a leader who might be really dominant and micromanaging. Well, what our research has shown is that if you have a leader who says, actually, this is something I want to get better at, and it can't be just because everybody's telling me I'm micromanaging. It needs to be because that leader has begun to see there's actually cost to continuing to work in those ways. Mm-hmm. So the person comes to terms with, yes, I really need to do this. And what our work does is help the person go through a process where they are able to basically get to see this unconscious, hidden, competing goal that they have, which is going to keep them from being able to make progress on their micromanagement goal. Mm-hmm. So they may see, for example, that they have a goal to always be the person who, scores the goal, so to speak, mm-hmm. or who is always adding tremendous value, mm-hmm. or is the leader everybody goes to. When they have trouble, and when somebody sees that, oh, I have this goal, yes, to work on being less dominant and less micromanaging, but at the exact same time, I have been unaware and now see I have a goal, which is to really be the important person in the whole process here, and is the person who makes everything work. Well, if you don't realize that's what your big unconscious driver is, no matter how motivated you are to try to become less micromanaging, you won't succeed, because when you reach a certain threshold that begins to threaten your sense of, whoa, I'm not really that big important player anymore, mm-hmm. all of a sudden you're going to go back to your micromanaging behavior. Mm-hmm. So that's this idea of having the insight of seeing your immune system. Mm-hmm. And then what our work does is help people to unearth what are some of the guiding unconscious assumptions and beliefs they've held that keep them at a place where, they feel like the only way to protect themselves is to be the most important person in the room, for example. Mm-hmm. And the work of helping them to create sustainable change ultimately comes down to helping them to really examine those unconscious beliefs and see how much in reality it could go differently than that. And that's how they begin to expand their mindset repertoire, which is what leads to the sustainable behavior changes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's a hard, honest look, right? at those things. And I started looking at this process and going, wow, this has got to be, the look in the mirror that's open and honest. So hearing you say they need to want to change intrinsically versus just because they've gotten feedback, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yes. So the other thing that you're saying, which I want to underscore, is that it's not necessarily comfortable looking at the kind of thing that I'm now describing to you. And I think we all need to just acknowledge that is one of the things that makes change hard, which is that we tend to want to not look at some of the things that, or feel some of the things that may be getting in our way. And I'm laughing because it reminds me of one of my favorite cartoons. It's of a fellow who's lying down on a psychiatrist's couch. Mm-hmm. And there's a caption underneath the picture that says, it's something like, look, call it denial if you think, but no, look, call it denial if you like. But I think what goes on in my personal life is none of my own damn business. And what I love about that is it's like, here I am. I'm here trying to really kind of get my life together and help myself move to that next place.
Yep.
But I'm not willing to look at those sort of things. And I think that is because what goes on inside of us and looking at it can be uncomfortable and it can be discouraging and it might even be downright distressing or painful.
Yeah.
And people have a lot of experience that I want to just acknowledge, which is that tuning into negative feelings all by itself doesn't necessarily lead to anything productive, and you can feel like you're wasting your time and it's navel gazing. And why are we even bothering to do that? So there's a lot, I think, that's cultural in our Western society that says, don't even bother going to what's going on inside of you. That's just a bunch of, soft stuff.
Right.
But this is what I really do want to emphasize, which is that is so essential to our being able to release ourselves and unlock ourselves from our immune system, because it is ultimately about helping us to see that we don't have to protect our inners, those soft things, as much as we believe unconsciously we need to.
Oh, yeah. And you have developed such an in-depth, well-researched process, 4 stages of looking at that I'm excited to talk about. But I'm just struck by the fact that it's not always, we started by talking about somebody who might be very dominant, or maybe when you hear the title of the book and think about change, like, oh, I know who needs to read this book. It's not just the asshole that we all wish would figure out these blind spots. But for all of us, I read it and I'm thinking, oh gosh, there's so many things I do that I don't want to do. I go into a meeting saying I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to listen more than I talk. I'm going to hear everybody else's views. And then boom, before I know it, I'm interrupting with my thought and my take on it. And so you're helping me see as well, okay, there's a process that can help me get at what are the things that I'm not even aware of, that are some needs that are driving me, that once I get clear on what they are, then I've got a shot at overcoming
Exactly. That's right. And just to make a little parenthetical here, the hope is that if you are able to see these unconscious goals, it will help you to be kinder to yourself and realize, I see why, despite my promise to myself, my vow, I'm not going to interrupt everybody this time, that you still do, right?
Yeah.
Because it is actually, those behaviors are brilliantly serving some other need that you have. It's just that you haven't been aware of that need. So that's also the big hope in this, is that we can just be kinder to ourselves as we use a more fitting change methodology to take the changes really intend.
Yeah. And I love that, because it's easy to get down on ourselves, especially when we keep trying to change something and we fail. But recognizing, often our greatest strength is also our greatest liability. And I'm an ideator, love ideas, and boom, that can be a strength, but boy, that can be my biggest liability, is when I actually verbalize those more than I ought. So
yes, I think I'm totally with you on that. It's every strength, when it's overdone, does become a liability, because it drives out other possibilities, especially in yourself as well as other people.
Now, before we get into some of the method that you've tested and been using, let's talk about that word change. We're saying it a lot, and you do some insightful distinctions about technical change versus adaptive change. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I want to start by saying we owe this distinction to the work of Ron Heifetz at the Harvard Kennedy School. He's the one who originally defined the differences, and most importantly, he says the single biggest failure of leadership is to treat adaptive challenges like technical problems. And this is, I think, one of the most significant contributions to the leadership literature in like a decade. So what does it mean? In a nutshell, technical challenges are simpler than the adaptive ones, and they can be solved by knowledge that already exists. So there are apparent solutions. That's different from an adaptive kind of change, which is definitely more complicated. And essentially, it is change that involves people having to do inner work. They need to change their mindset somehow. They need to shift how they think and feel about things. And that's what makes it much more complex. And we are so often galvanized by how quickly, I can check the box here and I can do X and Y and Z, but we don't realize that's just the technical fixed portion of the change challenge, which doesn't mean you don't need that, but it does mean that's not the whole game, and that you really need to be looking at more of this inner work that has to happen. So that's the distinction.
Yeah. So it strikes me that two different people could be focused on the same goal to change something. And for one, it might be a technical change. And for another, it may be an adaptive change.
Exactly. That's really insightful. You really understood the key thing that we're trying to say here, which is you can never tell from the outside. Is this going to be only a technical goal or challenge here, or is this change going to actually need to involve both technical and adaptive? So let me give you an example of that, because people are often one of the most common goals that leaders come to us with has to do with having more courageous conversations or getting better at giving direct and timely feedback. And every leader knows that is such an important aspect of how you help people really get the work done and done well and in time and so on. For some people, all they will need is to be exposed to something like a technique which we learned about from the Center for Creative Leadership. It's called SBI technique. It's situation, behavior, and impact. And it's really quite a lovely technique. You tell the person, here's the situation. When we were in the meeting, blah, blah, your behavior, you pulled out your phone and were texting, and the I is the impact on me. And I felt distracted, and that you were basically not with me in the whole meeting there. Okay, so I have that technique and I'm able to immediately put it into play, and things happen from it, as in the person hears the impact where good things can happen, right? For other people, they can hear the exact same technique and they can know this is the moment I need to use that technique I just went to that workshop on. Yet they can't bring themselves to actually use it. Why? Why is that? So for that person, we would have a hypothesis that there's something going on internally that's making it hard. There's some risk they feel like they would inevitably be having to take by using that technique. And for what we've learned from many people is that a lot of people have an unconscious goal, which is to keep the relationship smooth, or to not hurt the relationship, or to not be somebody who might offend somebody. And because they start associating, if I really tell you what I'm thinking and feeling, I will offend you. They just can't use the technique. So that's why it's in that person's best interest to do that digging and have the insight. Oh, I see. There is a mindset holding me back here. And that becomes part of the curriculum I need to take on to be a better leader, to give feedback.
Oh, that's a great example. It sparks the thought of a leader I was coaching. And for her, that same topic around having difficult conversations, being more direct or assertive, all it took was me providing her with a framework. I talked to her about Kim Scott's radical candor. She's got this great 4-quadrant model. And she was like, that's so helpful. It turned the light on for her. It helped her think about the approach. And she started having conversations immediately. And so much so, she resolved this very difficult performance issue. HR was giving her accolades for how well she handled it and so on. So for her, that was a technical change. Some information, some framework was useful. For others,
exactly,
I'm working with, that, we may start with knowledge or framework and any tool like that. And when it doesn't work, then we can see, okay, there's an adaptive change. This is going to take more than that. And so let's talk about that. Let's talk about your immunity mapping, or the way you like to describe how to help someone through that change.
Yes. So before I go into the actual kind of structure of that, I want to go take that example you were just using a step further to say that, sometimes people can have an adaptive challenge around specifically giving feedback, and it may not even have anything to do with this unconscious goal that people continue to like me or I don't offend people. It could have to do with things like, I don't actually want to have to deal with this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't want to, I feel like it's going to be a waste of time to actually raise this with the person. And I'm going to have to stay on top of this and, end up taking me away from the work that I really can do. And it doesn't have, you never know what the nature of the adaptive challenge is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great point.
Yes. Okay. So how do we know, how do we get to the idiosyncraticness of it? So this is a very individualized process, and we do call it immunity to change mapping. And the way that it starts is that we ask people to identify a goal, an improvement goal that really means a lot to him or her. And it needs to meet certain guidelines, like, you try to help the person name the goal in a way that it's stated affirmatively. It's something you want to move towards, not just what you want to avoid or eliminate. And it's got to be something that is really about you changing and not some clever way to get other people to shape up, which, if we had the magic wand, many of us would want to create change that way. So that's the starting place. And we ask people to get clear about why that's an important goal to them. And this takes us back to the very earliest part of our conversation here today, which is you do need to be motivated to make the change. And this is like those heart patients getting in touch with, why do I want to really continue to live? Why is it important as a leader, for example, that I take on this goal of being a better listener? Why does this really matter to me? So that's the first step. Then the second step is, it's all counterintuitive in some respects from here on out in the process, because the very next step we ask is for people to do an honest self-inventory of all the behaviors they engage in, nobody else, just them, that work against the goal that they have just named. And we ask them truly to just list them and don't worry about it. Don't evaluate it. Don't worry about why you do it. Just be honest about what you're doing. And it's at that point, that most people, their tacit change model starts clicking in, and it's like, okay, let me make some, good lists about how I can stop doing those things. And, just try to eliminate those behaviors. But then we really say those are meant to be a resource to help you do this, take this third step. And that third step is for you to imagine that you are doing those behaviors for a really important reason. And what we're going to get to in column 3 is, what is that hidden competing goal that you have that is leading you to engage in those behaviors? So in a really kind of specific way, what we ask the person to do is to first imagine, what's the worry or fear you experience as you imagine yourself doing the opposite of the behaviors that you just wrote. And so what ends up coming up are things like, oh, they're inevitably like some kind of their image will somehow be marred. So, I worry I'm going to look like a fool. I worry I'm going to lose control. I worry I'm going to hurt the relationship. I worry all kinds of things come up for people. And then we help them to see that they don't just have that worry, but that there's a part of them that's devoted to making sure the thing they're worried never happens. And that is what we call their hidden competing goal. And this is the point where somebody can step back from those first 3 steps and see their immune system. And the immune system is, I have a foot on the gas in what we call column 1, their goal that they start with saying, go, go, go. And at the exact same time, they have a foot on the brake when they see their competing hidden commitment, and they are basically in the car, standing still, status quo, with lots of energy going in on both the go-go and the no-go. So that's the immune system. And then we take a 4th step in this mapping process. And that's the last step in this portion of the insight generating part. And we basically ask, what assumptions are you making about yourself or about others in the world that explain why you protect yourself in the way you do in that competing goal? And, these unspoken and often unconscious assumptions are the ultimate source of really why we are doing those obstructive behaviors that we named earlier. And they are the gateway to more substantial, lasting change. But that's the whole mapping process.
Okay. So step 1, identifying a goal that you truly are motivated to change. Step 2, make a list of all the things that you're doing or not doing that are counter to the very thing that you want to do. Okay. So I go in that meeting. I want to be a listener. I want to allow others to have, the airtime, and then boom, column 2, I just spoke up. I just jumped in right in the middle of somebody's sentence, and so on. So column 2, all the stuff we're doing that's exactly counter to the very thing we want.
Exactly.
Column 3 is uncover those hidden commitments.
Yeah.
Okay. You said you start with what you're worried about.
Yeah. So can we stay with you on this?
Yeah.
You can say no.
Okay. Sure.
All right. So you just named that behavior, which is I jump in, I interrupt someone. So if you could take a moment and try to recall like a last time you did that. And you're now going to imagine doing the opposite of that. And you're going to imagine listening to the person, not interrupting. What's the biggest worry or fear that comes up for you?
Yeah. Well, first impression is there's just impulse behavior. Then I just speak before I even recognize as a strong extrovert. Second thing, though, is let's see that it's an important idea, or I want to make a difference. I want to have my contribution count. And so I want to be sure to share, perhaps.
Yeah.
Let's see. Good stuff. I got to keep digging, but I'm sure there's...
But those are great beginnings to identifying what's going on for you in this unconscious way, which is there's like a worry or fear. Somehow I won't be able to make my contribution. I won't be able to make a difference.
Oh, yep. That's a big driver for me. So you found something.
Well, you found it. I'm just repeating back your words, but that's what the exercise is designed to do, is to hold you, scaffold each person in this inquiry so that they can come to it themselves and see, oh, I see, I have a goal, which is to make sure that my contributions always count, to make sure I make a difference. And here's the beautiful moment. You can step back and see both of these goals you have are true. It's not like the I want to be a better listener is a fake-o goal. And the real thing is I want to, always be a contributor and make a difference. It's just that they are both going on simultaneous. And if you don't know that,
Yep.
the unconscious one is always going to be the winner.
Mm-hmm.
It's always going to override the conscious
Yep.
intention to be a better listener.
Which is so, powerful. This is why I think your work is so spot on. I work in Silicon Valley with a lot of smart people. They're very smart, they're very competent, they're very good problem solvers. And so you would expect, once you know what the problem is, you've gotten feedback, now you're aware, then you will solve that problem and you will, decide your steps for changing that, and you'll make that change. But what you just said is that the unconscious driver is always going to win. And so it takes something far more than sheer will or some good steps,
Exactly. It takes more than being like the kind of smart that you're referring to has to do with a really, terrific and important cognitive capacity. And I don't want to, give a definition of what that smart is, but what we're talking about here in the process is a different kind of, an additional kind of smart, which Daniel Goleman would call like your emotional intelligence, right? And that's what we're bringing to ourselves here, which is the insight that we have emotional drivers, and they are, just because we're not conscious of them doesn't mean they aren't powerful. They are really powerful. And if we can add that kind of quote unquote smartness to our repertoire, we will be able to solve these kinds of human problems, because humans essentially are not just brains on sticks.
Great. So that's step 3, column 3, getting clear on what the drivers are, the unconscious ones that are overriding the goal we're trying for. And then say more about step 4, column 4.
Right. So step 4, what are the things that you're assuming are true, that you have to have that hidden commitment to always be contributing and making a difference. So I might ask you, for example, what's your assumption? If I don't make a contribution that counts, then what?
Yeah. Oh gosh. I'm sure it, then I'm not valued. Then I'm not, I'm not bringing worth, or I don't have worth. Or it's, I'm sure that's a starting point.
Yes, it is. And I just want to say, I'm really admiring you're just laying it out there. And here I am as a human being. And this is the thing, if we can just normalize what you're saying, it goes on for all of us in whatever our own variety is. But if I take yours as an example, what assumption you're holding is some version, if I heard you right, is if I don't make a contribution that counts, then I'm not valued, which is that a fair summary?
I'm sure we're getting at some good stuff here.
Which might be like another accompanying assumption is I am only valued when I make a contribution. That's interesting. And what are the assumptions about what is a contribution? It's an idea in your worldview, perhaps different from, hey, is it possible? And now we're getting to how do you overturn the immune system? Is it possible that I could imagine actually that assumption is limiting my capacity to participate in a group in an effective way? Like, what happens if it turns out I can actually contribute in powerful ways, not by putting ideas into the pot, but by helping to bring others' ideas out? Or what happens if I do more of like something that's synthesizing ideas? Like, could I expand my repertoire and to see that, wow, there's a lot of different ways I could add value. And that's how you begin to open up more of the kind of repertoire in your mind. Wait, it doesn't this is a limiting assumption I have. I could actually try something else. And that's what you do in moving forward, is you create small, safe tests that allow you to see whether your big assumptions are actually so 100% accurate.
Great. So we set out to disprove that assumption,
Exactly.
and I
Exactly.
love it. You put your finger on, if I've got something unconscious, believing that I'm only valued when I make a contribution, and I have defined that contribution, right? And then I go test it and I see, what if I draw out some of the quiet folks in the room and I do a job of bringing out their ideas that wouldn't be spoken, and that solves the problem. Wow,
Yes.
that was the
Yes.
best value I could provide of all.
Yes. So, and that's a question.
Mm-hmm.
Will it? I don't know.
Yeah.
But at least you're going to pay attention to what happens when I actually try it and I see what happens in the real world, not just some story I make up in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great. Now, when you first started testing this method, I believe you saw like a 30 to 40% success rate, which is still far beyond the 1 in 8 from the heart patient statistic. Now you've seen through years and years of working with leaders and so on, you've got a tremendous success rate. What is important for those who embark on this journey to do to increase their chance of success?
Yes. Well, I think one of the things that is very important is that people are aware that when you are doing adaptive change work, it takes time. We live in such results now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, results yesterday. Time that it's really hard. I think there's a lot of counter forces for people to be taking the time to make these sort of changes.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, to me, if you can make the change in a faster way, by all means do it. But the process is really going to help you if you've tried to make the change and you haven't. So first, it's really being aware. This kind of change takes time. So you have to be willing to invest that kind of time. And when you can say, I get it, it's going to take time, you can be more patient is really the thing I'm trying to get to here. Because the impatience is sometimes what drives us to fall back into the just do it model of change, which is not going to work when there's adaptive problems. It goes back to the Heifetz quote of, the single biggest problem in leadership is treating the adaptive challenges with technical means. So I think that's a really important thing. Just know that this takes time. And secondly, I would say, to let people know that it's not all easy. And you may actually have to look and feel things that you're not accustomed to. It's meant to stretch you. And that's how you know you're actually in a place. If you can stay, in this good incubating space, it means that you are actually stretching yourself. Because if nothing new is happening for you inside, it's more just of what it's more business is the same. So those are the two big things I would say.
Great. And, both of those are really compelling, not the answers we want to hear. It takes time and it's not easy. And that second one is not easy, makes me think about the fact that this podcast, it's about authentic leadership. And I'm curious what connections you see with your work and authenticity.
Yeah. So the one way that I think about authenticity is, it's the difference between showing up as your whole self, all of me, versus the more typical where there's a work me and a real me and kind of living a divided life. And I think that's often, it can be a conscious decision people make, or it can be an unconscious decision. And that has a lot to do with often a person's self, like they want to protect themselves in their work environment. Like, I don't want the real me to be seen because, and this is kind of probably an assumption, but because if you saw the real me, you wouldn't accept me. or even sometimes people don't show up with the whole work me and they feel like, oh, I need to cover my weaknesses and, not admit when I make a mistake or, I'm going to lose status. So I think that authenticity where you hold yourself back can be because we make a whole bunch of assumptions about how we will be treated if we show up as our whole selves. But I also think, and this is where our new book, An Everyone Culture, really takes us to in our work and research, is that this whole authenticity piece has a lot to do with an organization's culture. And that is something that is very much in the leader's hand. And that I know this is a generalization, but there's a lot of good data out there, some of which we have ourselves uncovered, which says in many organizations, mistakes are really not welcomed. How much are we really open to people continuing to grow? Because if we don't allow space and take it as a given that it's a good thing for people to grow in the workplace, it's very hard for people to be authentic.
Yeah. Okay, that's so good to think about it in the context. You've done a lot of work in organizations. What are some of the most common challenges that you see leaders face and what they're trying to work on a change that's difficult?
Yes, so that's a great question. And I would say there are definitely a handful of them. I think for most leaders, there's a lot of traction around this need to get better at attending to or taking on or thinking about strategic issues, which leads them to goals like being able to better delegate or being better able to hold people accountable, because they're spending so much time either doing things themselves or chasing after people and so on. So those are big goals around the delegating and accountability. So that's, I would say, a very common one. To be working more productively together as opposed to the silos that they typically have been very successful working in. The other one I would say is the ability to get better at having difficult conversations, delicate conversations, courageous conversations is, a lot of different ways people name what that is, but it's the space of having those uncomfortable conversations. And another one I'd say is being a better listener. That is often a very important one. So those are, I would say, the big
yes,
five.
Those track very well with what I see in my coaching. And you can imagine, this whole arena around, delegate more, don't do it myself. When up to that stage, they've been incredibly successful by doing it themselves. So that third column, those unconscious drivers are really at play.
Right. That's right. And that's really a significant shift that happens very often when people make the move from being individual contributors to being leaders, because they are so accustomed. They got to be so well regarded because they did take care of everything themselves. But then there's you need to make a very different shift in order to really be bringing out the best in other people and their ability to individually contribute.
Yes.
So that's calls for a whole different, way of making sense of things. And I've got to give up on the ways I know how to deliver my value.
Good stuff. Let's talk about how we can embark on this successful journey with change in our lives. Reading your book and applying your immunity mapping is the obvious path. If I ask, what should we do?
Yeah.
And you've laid that out so beautifully in your book. But what about the immediate front? Even before Amazon can deliver the book to our doorstep, what is an immediate action we can take to get started?
Well, I would say an immediate action would be to get ready to do your immunity to change mapping process when that book does arrive at your door. So how do you do that? Start thinking about what's the goal you really want to work on and why it's important to you. So an action step you might take is to go talk with a few people you know well and get some feedback from them about what they think that if you were to really focus on would lead you to be your best self or lead you to be your most effective leader, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It might also mean looking back over this last year or so and asking yourself, what has been hard for you to get traction on despite your intention to get traction? Because sometimes that itself will begin to reveal what might be your personal version of an adaptive goal.
Mm-hmm.
Because the things that we often want to make happen and then we can't, despite that intention, that may be like a trailhead to seeing what is an adaptive need that we have. So those are some first steps that I would take. I would also encourage people, if you want to learn more about the immunity to change, to go to the website of Minds at Work, which is the organization that houses the work that we do with leaders, with their teams, with individuals on their overcoming their immunities to change.
Terrific. This is really motivating, even though, as you said, it's hard and it takes time. Very compelling, knowing the potential success for things that we have wanted to do, wanted to change, and not yet succeeded. So this is far better than New Year's resolutions. That's our way of resolving we're going to make this change, and we know the statistics on how many of those fail. So
yep.
This is exciting.
Yeah, probably close to where we started with the heart patient study.
Yes.
Maybe 1 out of 7.
Great. Well, your work, it's so well-founded. The research, the rigor, and then the down-to-earth way that you lay it out. This is fabulous. And I'm excited for more people to discover what you've been uncovering.
Thank you. And thank you for your transparency as we've had this conversation and being willing to look at your own immune system.
Well, I've got some work to do, of course. The biggest
challenge
was deciding, I know you need to choose one thing for column 1, right? I'm like, but how do you choose just one?
I know. Well, that is the beauty of this model, which is it's very reusable.
Yep.
But I would suggest to people, what you're saying actually is not uncommon. People are like, how am I supposed to choose just one goal? But do choose just one goal. And sometimes the very surprising reality is the things that are going on at that unconscious level that we talked about turn out to also be influencing some of the reasons. There are some of the reasons why we also are having trouble in other areas. So even taking one thing on may actually help open things up on a number of different change goals.
Yes, I can imagine getting this exponential result as you unlock in one arena. It would have this multiplier effect in so many other arenas as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for taking the time for this conversation today, Lisa.
My pleasure. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in today. If you'd like to get one of Lisa's books, click the Reads button at leadersgetreal.com. And for the same Amazon price, you'll get a great read for yourself and help provide education for impoverished kids. To find resources and get started tackling your immunity to change, including an upcoming online course with the authors, be sure to check out the show notes in the podcast tab at leadersgetreal.com. And until next time, go forth and get real.